Did I just hear that right? You want to play us for food?" The room burst into laughter sharp and cruel, bouncing off the polished walls of the grand hall. A dozen eyes locked on the thin girl in the doorway. Her jacket was torn, her sneakers split at the seams, but her gaze held steady. The girl did not flinch. She stepped forward, her voice calm. "One game. If I win, you feed me. If I lose, I will clean your floors." The laughter grew louder. A woman in pearls leaned to her neighbor. "This child thinks she can gamble for scraps as if this is a tavern." The men smirked, glasses of whiskey in hand. Theodore Banks pushed back his heavy chair. His voice boomed across the hall. 40 years I have played chess. 40 years. And you think you will last 5 minutes against me?" The girl moved closer to the table. Her fingers brushed the polished wood. Her stomach twisted with hunger, but her eyes never left the board. She remembered her grandmother's words whispered in the dark of the shelter. "Chess is life. Baby, every piece has a purpose. Every sacrifice has meaning." The room gathered tighter around her, mocking whispers rising. They expected a show. They expected her humiliation. The girl sat slowly, her knees trembling. She reached out with small, careful hands and slid a pawn forward. The sound of wood striking wood echoed louder than the laughter. For the first time, the room went quiet. She lifted her chin. Her dark eyes burned with something none of them could see. A weapon, forged in nights of hunger and hours, stolen at the library, and lessons carved into her memory by a woman who believed she would one day be more than a pawn. Theodore Banks laughed again, though softer now. "So you do know how the pieces move." "Very. Well, let us begin, child. I will teach you the meaning of defeat." The girl answered with silence, her gaze fixed on the board. Her next move came quickly, precise, deliberate. The crowd leaned in. Some rolled their eyes. Others sneered, but a few frowned, confused by the confidence in her play. A cold wind rattled the doors outside, but inside the fire was no longer in the hearth. It was in her hands, in the click of each piece against the board. What they did not realize was that this was not a desperate child begging for pity. This was a test. A silent declaration hidden in 64 squares. Her pawn stood strong, her knights ready, her queen waiting in the shadows. And as her fingers released another piece with steady grace, the room unknowingly stepped into her game, a game that would change everything. Theodore leaned back, smug, certain his victory was already written. He pushed his pawn forward with a lazy flick of his fingers. The crowd chuckled again, but a few of the older members narrowed. Their eyes, they had seen that opening before. Too careless, too open. The girl's reply came instantly precise. Her knight leapt forward, and the board shifted in a way that made one or two whispers die in the throats of those watching. "Cute, Theodore," muttered his voice heavy with arrogance. "You read a book. Once did you, child, that will not save you." He adjusted his cufflinks, then moved again with theatrical flair. His queen hovered early, his attack clumsy but dressed in confidence. The girl did not look at him, not once. Her eyes never strayed from the board. Her breath came steady. Her hand moved with purpose. Her pawn advanced, snapping into position. A tiny crack appeared in his defense, one no one else yet noticed. The laughter began. Again, Margaret Sinclair waved a jeweled hand, dismissing the child's effort. "Look at her trying so hard. It is almost adorable." But at the back of the crowd, a man leaned closer. Harrison Vale. His expression sharpened as he followed the trail of pieces. His mouth opened slightly in surprise. He said nothing, only watched as her moves built quiet pressure invisible to those blinded by pride. Theodore smirked, leaning across the table, his heavy watch glinting in the light. "Tell me, girl, what will you eat when you lose a scrap of bread? Some soup, perhaps." The girl raised her eyes for the first time. They were not pleading. They were not afraid. They were cold, steady, unbroken. She whispered, "Check." The word cut through the room, sharper than glass. Silence swallowed the laughter. All eyes turned to the board. Theodore blinked, staring as if the pieces had betrayed him. The smugness slipped for a heartbeat before he forced a laugh. A child's trick. Nothing more. He moved, quickly covering the threat, yet leaving himself more exposed. The girl countered without hesitation, another piece locked into place. The attack deepened unseen by most but undeniable to Harrison Vale, who now stepped forward, his voice quiet but clear. "Ted, you might want to pay attention." Theodore waved him off. "I have this under control. 5 moves at most." The girl's hand hovered. Her queen glided across the board with elegant certainty. A murmur rippled through the circle surrounding them. Several guests exchanged uncertain glances. The shape of something remarkable was forming, but only she seemed to know the ending. Her eyes lifted once more, her voice soft, deliberate. "Your move, sir." Theodore's hand trembled slightly for the first time. The crowd leaned closer, phones lifted. A storm was gathering inside 64 squares, and the man who had mocked her hunger was now standing on the edge of it without knowing. Theodore's fingers hovered over the board. He tapped. A pawn, then pulled back. He tapped his bishop, then froze. His confident smirk was fading, replaced by the tight jaw of a man suddenly aware of danger. The room was hushed now. Only the faint clink of ice in a glass and the soft creak of leather chairs broke the silence. The crowd leaned in closer, drawn not just by curiosity, but by the magnetic pull of humiliation forming in front of them. The girl shifted in her chair. Her shoulders straightened. Her hand moved steady, precise. She advanced her knight, and the trap tightened unseen by most but unmistakable to Harrison Vale. His eyes lit with a flash of recognition. He leaned closer, whispering, "My God, she is setting a mating net." Ted laughed too loud, desperate. "Do not be ridiculous. She is." "Ah, a child. She does not even understand the position." But his voice cracked at the edges. The queen that had once strutted across the board now sat stranded. The pawns that were meant to protect his king had become prison bars. The girl pressed forward. Each move came without hesitation, as though she were replaying a memory rather than inventing strategy now. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her mind, steady and sure. "Sometimes, baby girl, let them think they are winning. That is when the real game begins." Murmur rippled through the crowd. A few members who had mocked her minutes earlier now studied the board with furrowed brows. Margaret Sinclair's hand dropped from her pearls. Her laughter had dried up completely. Theodore shifted in, his seat sweat glistening at his temple. He pushed a rook forward, aggressive, reckless. The girl did not blink. She slid her bishop into position, trapping the rook instantly. Gasps erupted around the room. "Impossible," Theodore hissed, slamming his palm on the table. The pieces rattled against polished wood. The girl did not flinch. Her lips parted slightly and a whisper left them again. Soft, lethal. "Check." The word echoed louder this time. Phones rose higher. Fingers flew to capture the unfolding. Disaster. The humiliation was no longer private. It was being etched into the memory of every single guest. Harrison Vale crossed his arms, his voice calm but sharp. "Ted, she has you cornered. You should resign before it becomes ugly." Ted snapped. Silence. "She is bluffing. She has to be." He stared at the board, searching for escape squares, but everywhere he turned another piece cut him off. The pawns, the knights, the rooks. They all worked together like soldiers in formation. The girl leaned back, finally lifting her gaze, locking it on him with eyes far older than 12. "You laughed at me, sir," she said softly, "but chess does not care about wealth or titles, it only cares about truth." Her queen slid across the board. The crowd erupted in gasps. The king was trapped. Theodore's hands shook. He looked up at the faces around him, every one of them watching, waiting. He was drowning in silence. The king trembled in his square, boxed in by walls of ivory and ebony. Theodore's eyes darted over the board, desperate to find air, but everywhere he looked there was suffocation. The laughter that had filled the room earlier had vanished, replaced, with a silence so sharp it cut through him like glass. Maya sat still, her small fingers resting gently on the edge of the table. Her face calm, but her eyes carried fire, the kind of fire that made men twice her age recoil. She did not need to gloat. The board was speaking for her. Ted slammed a piece down his rook, scraping hard across the wood. "You think you have me, girl? Watch this." He shoved it into place, clumsy force replacing careful calculation. It was the move of a man drowning, not a player. Commanding a game, the room collectively winced. Harrison Vale let out a low whistle, shaking his head quietly. Enough members knew already this was not just a mistake, this was a death sentence. Maya leaned forward, the faintest hint of a smile tugged. At her lips, not of mockery, but of certainty. She moved her rook with measured grace. Its landing echoed louder than Ted's angry shove. "Check," she whispered. The word cut through the air like thunder. Theodore jolted upright, his face flushed. Red, then pale. Sweat pooled at his hairline. His heavy hands clutched the arms of his chair as if trying to anchor himself to reality. He searched frantically for an answer every second, only revealing how hopeless his situation was. The crowd pressed. Closer necks craning over shoulders. Someone's phone slipped from their grip, clattering against the marble floor, but not a single head turned. All eyes remained fixed on the impossible sight playing out before them. A 12-year-old girl from the streets, dismantling decades of arrogance in 15 calculated moves. Ted's voice cracked. She cannot win. Not here, not against me. His words sounded less like defiance and more like prayer. A man begging fate to change its mind, but the girl was merciless. Not cruel, merciless. She advanced her queen. The board shifted like tectonic plates, every piece under her command marching toward destiny. Another gasp erupted. Check again. The words reverberated in the oak-paneled walls, magnified by crystal chandeliers. The king staggered back a square. The crowd leaned in like spectators in an arena, waiting for the final blow. Harrison Vale's whisper broke through the silence. One more move, and it's over. Ted's hands shook. He reached forward, trembling, sweat dripping onto polished wood, but there was no saving move left. Every option was a noose tightening around his own neck. His arrogance had blinded him, and now the whole room saw it. Maya's eyes flickered once toward the chandeliers. As if hearing her grandmother's voice guiding her steady, she lowered her hand gently onto the queen and slid it across the board. The piece struck like lightning. "Checkmate," she said quietly. The room erupted. Gasps, shouts, disbelief, phones captured. It from every angle. Ted slumped back in his chair, his empire of confidence collapsing into dust. The silence after the word checkmate was heavier than any shout. Ted's chest rose and fell. His face drained of color. He blinked down at the board, as if the pieces had betrayed him. The very game he thought was his kingdom turning against him in front of everyone. Then the room erupted. The sound was chaos, overlapping voices rising like a storm. Some laughed in disbelief. Some muttered curses. Others simply stared, their mouths open. Harrison Vale leaned forward, studying the final position again and again, shaking his head with admiration. "That wasn't luck," he murmured. "That was mastery." Margaret Sinclair fanned herself, rapidly, diamonds. On her fingers flashing in the chandelier light, her voice cut sharp through the noise. "Impossible. It's a trick. She must have memorized the sequence." "Ted is too experienced to fall like this." Charles Hoffman adjusted his glasses, refusing to meet the eyes of the other members. His lips twitched, searching for excuses, but none came. Ted pushed back his chair violently, the legs screeching against the polished floor. She cheated. He roared, his hand trembling as he pointed at Maya. No child off. The streets plays like that. She had help, someone coached her. You set me up, but no one moved to support him. The crowd that had once mocked Maya now leaned in toward her, some recording, some whispering with eyes wide, others simply frozen by the sight of the child who had dismantled arrogance move. By move, Maya sat quietly, her hands folded in her lap, her breathing steady, her shoulders squared. There was no smile, no gloating, only calm certainty that the game had spoken louder than insults ever. Could Harrison finally stood? He looked around the room, his voice low but commanding. "Gentlemen, ladies, you all saw the board. Every piece, every move, she played with precision. I have lost games to masters who were less accurate. If you cannot admit what just happened, you are blind to truth." A murmur spread through the crowd. Some heads nodded slowly, some shifted uncomfortably, but the atmosphere had changed. No longer mocking, now restless, unsettled. Their fortress of privilege had been cracked by a girl in worn sneakers and a threadbare jacket. Ted's fists clenched. He slammed them once on the table, rattling the captured pieces. "I demand a rematch right now." He glared at Maya with fury that barely hid his humiliation. But Richard Whitmore's voice cut through the noise, cold as steel. "Enough, Theodore. You've embarrassed yourself and this club. She beat you fairly and brilliantly." The room fell silent again. All eyes returned to Maya. She finally raised her chin, her voice soft but clear. "Thank you for the game, sir. Your opening was strong, but you pushed your bishop too far. It left your king weak." The words landed with a weight heavier than mockery. Her analysis, stripped of arrogance, only magnified her brilliance. And for the first time, the powerful men and women of the Grandview Chess Club looked not at a street child to be dismissed, but at something else entirely. A prodigy. The board was still warm from Ted's humiliation when another voice rose from the back, steady and calm, yet commanding enough to silence the restless whispers. "I'll play her." Harrison Vale stepped forward, the crowd parting instinctively as though they recognized the weight his name carried. He wasn't. Ted Banks puffed up on wealth and ego. Harrison was different. A former state champion, a man who had tasted battle on the board against national competitors and left his mark. The room reacted instantly. Some gasped. Some leaned in closer. Some whispered as though they were witnessing the beginning of a duel between two worlds. If anyone could expose the girl's victory as a fluke, it was Harrison. His silver hair caught the light. His tailored suit moved like armor, but his eyes were sharp and calculating, locked on Maya with something. The others had not given her respect. Maya's stomach tightened. She had expected the laughter, expected the cruelty, but not this. Not a player who looked at her as if she were worth taking seriously. Her grandmother's words echoed in her mind. "D. Girl, when they stop mocking you and start measuring you, that's when the real game begins." Richard Whitmore raised a brow, amused and intrigued Harrison. "You can't be serious. She's a child." Harrison didn't flinch. She just dismantled Theodore. "In 15 moves, I am very serious. If she's what she appears to be, then one game with me will tell us the truth. If she's a fraud, I'll prove it." The crowd buzzed louder. Margaret Sinclair hissed, "Richard, this is madness." But others leaned forward, eager curiosity mixing with disbelief. Ted, still red from humiliation, barked from the corner. "She'll crumble against Harrison." "She has to." Harrison turned to Maya. "Would you like to play Miss Thompson?" His voice was even almost gentle, but beneath. It was a challenge, clear as day. A lion inviting a cub into the arena. Maya straightened her small hands, still trembling slightly, but her gaze unwavering. "Yes, sir," she replied quietly but firmly. "I'll play." A murmur rippled through the room. They moved. Toward the central table, the grand board with pieces carved from ivory and ebony under the glow of the chandelier. The crowd gathered tighter, their expensive fabrics brushing against each other as if pressed by invisible gravity. The silence was electric. Every breath, every step, amplified by anticipation. Harrison gestured courteously, "White or black, Miss Thompson? You choose." Maya's fingers brushed the pieces before she answered softly, "I'll take black." Harrison gave a faint smile as he opened with pawn to e4, classic, controlled, deliberate. The crowd leaned in whispering theory and predictions. Maya answered with c5, the Sicilian, defense, bold, fearless. The room stirred murmurs rising. He wasn't. Cowed. She was fighting back with one of the most aggressive replies in chess. Richard sipped his whiskey, eyes narrowing. This was no child, stumbling through mimicry. This was the beginning of something else. And, as the pieces clicked against the board, all of them knew they were about to witness a battle. None would forget. The pieces moved with a rhythm. No one expected. Harrison opened with precision. Every move calculated to squeeze the girl into a corner. His knight developed to f3 his bishop. Slid smoothly into position. His pawns claimed the center like soldiers marching in perfect order. The crowd whispered in approval. Harrison was showing his pedigree and Maya had nowhere to hide, but Maya didn't look flustered. Her eyes scanned the board not once but twice, as if she was painting a picture in her mind. Her fingers were steady as she pushed a pawn forward, then slid her knight into place. The Sicilian defense came alive under her touch. She wasn't merely surviving, she was shaping the battlefield. Her moves weren't rushed. They were deliberate, quiet daggers that cut deeper than anyone in the room realized. Ted Banks crossed his arms, muttering, "Beginner's luck is about to end." Margaret Sinclair smirked. She's holding on. For now. But Harrison will crush her like a child pulling the wings off a fly. Yet Harrison himself leaned back, studying her with growing intensity. He recognized the patience in her play, the kind of understanding you didn't get from watching a few games through a window. This was something earned through nights of discipline and endless repetition. 20 moves in the room shifted. The laughter had faded, replaced by silence, broken only by the click of carved ivory against wood. Each exchange was sharper than the last pawn's falling knights. Leaping rooks sliding into open files, Maya was no longer reacting. She was dictating, forcing Harrison to bend to her rhythm. He leaned forward, narrowing his eyes, his fingers hovering over a rook before, retreating to reconsider. The observers felt it too. The tide had changed. She had outmaneuvered him subtly, carefully, until Harrison's king was hemmed in by his own pieces. Harrison muttered almost to himself. Impressive. Richard Whitmore frowned, swirling his glass of whiskey. He saw it as clear as Harrison did. The girl wasn't playing tricks. She was weaving a net, and Harrison was the fish thrashing inside it. Maya lifted her bishop with a calm hand and set it down with a gentle click. Check. The word landed like thunder. The crowd jerked forward, craning to see the board. Harrison's face tightened, his jaw working as he scanned for a way out. He blocked, defended, retreated, but every square was poisoned, every line cut off. Then it came. Maya's. Rook sliding into position with devastating purpose. Checkmate. Her soft voice carried across the silent hall. Harrison sat, frozen, then slowly leaned back, a faint smile breaking through his controlled expression. He extended his hand across the table. "Congratulations, Miss Thompson," he said with sincerity. That was masterful. Gasps erupted around them. Some clutched their pearls, others whispered accusations, but none could deny what they had just witnessed. A homeless girl in worn clothes had outplayed the club's former champion with elegance and clarity. For the first time that night, the room wasn't laughing, it was listening. The silence after Harrison's resignation was heavier than the crystal chandeliers above. The members of the Grand View Chess Club stared as if the world had cracked beneath their feet. A child who walked in from the freezing streets had just dismantled one of their finest, without arrogance, without tricks, only pure, undeniable brilliance. Margaret Sinclair's lips parted, but no words came out. Victoria Peaton clutched her diamond bracelet like it could shield her from the truth. Charles Hoffman muttered something about luck, but even his voice betrayed doubt. Harrison himself was still smiling, a rare look of respect, softening his sharp features. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "she didn't just beat me. She revealed something we've all been blind to. Genius doesn't wear a suit. Genius doesn't need an invitation. Genius walks in when it's hungry. Enough. The crowd erupted into whispers. Some called it a miracle, others an embarrassment. But Maya sat quietly, her hands folded on her lap, her eyes lowered not to hide shame, but to gather strength. Then she looked up, her voice clear and steady. Came here asking only for food. You gave me laughter, you gave me insults, but I gave you chess. Chess that speaks for itself. Every phone was up now, recording every second, streaming her words beyond the polished walls and velvet curtains to thousands of eyes across the world. The girl they mocked as a vagrant was no longer invisible. She was a storm, and the storm had spoken. Richard Whitmore cleared his throat, his pride warring with the truth. Before tonight, this club stood as a fortress, but she has shown us what we were meant to be, a sanctuary for brilliance wherever it appears. Gasps broke the tension, but Maya rose to her feet and gathered her things. She didn't beg for their approval. She didn't ask for pity. She had already won more than the game. She had won their silence, and silence was louder than any applause. As she reached the door, Harrison's voice stopped her. "Miss Thompson, the world deserves to see what I saw tonight. Will you come back tomorrow?" Maya turned slightly, her eyes glimmering with both pain and possibility. "We'll see," she said, and stepped back into the cold night air, leaving behind a room forever changed. And dear viewer, as you've watched this story unfold, you've seen more than chess. You've seen the battle between arrogance and humility, between privilege and raw talent, between cruelty and survival. If Maya's courage moved you, if her quiet defiance inspired you, then don't just leave this story here. Share it. Let others know that brilliance can rise from anywhere. And before you go, hit subscribe to this channel, because tomorrow we'll uncover another story, just as powerful. Another truth the world tried to bury but couldn't. Tonight, you witnessed transformation. We see us for the next.